So again, kind of another kind of verbal review based on, so yesterday what we talked about is we talked about mainly 5 things. We talked about storage, we talked about databases, we talked about monitoring and scaling, including auto scaling and load balancers. We talked about automation, and we talked briefly about containers. And the intention of yesterday was to basically talk about a lot of the adjunctive services that are outside of application hosting, right? So outside of EC2, outside of Lambda, but obviously containerization is one of the core ways that you can actually host applications. And frankly, between that and serverless, pretty much that's where we're headed. Like we're going to be in a container world, probably a little bit less than a app on virtual machine world. Not that virtual machines are going away, as I said yesterday. Now, storage-wise, here's a few questions for you. So you may remember that there were 3 types of storage that we talked about yesterday. There was block storage, which is EBS and instant storage, and all the different types of EBS volumes. And then there was file storage, of which there were 2 particular types of services there. One of which only had 1 flavor, and one of which had 4 different flavors attached to it, of which we only covered 2 on the slides. And then, S3 was covered, has this particular type of storage. Does anyone remember the name of that 3rd type of storage? So it wasn't block, it wasn't file. What was that 3rd type of storage that S3 falls under? Good. Good. Now, one of the things that happens there is that S3 object storage is sometimes called API-based storage, right? Which is what its original name was back in the 2000s, back when EMC first came out with an API-based storage system, an object-based storage system. It started with a C. It was like CAS, or anyway, doesn't matter. So the concept of object storage has been around since the early 2000s. So it's not like when AWS came out with it, no one had ever done it before. They were just the first ones to make it really easy to do. Now, inside S3, there were 3 different ways of encrypting, right? So there was basically using SSE S3, which means we're using server-side encryption. That's what SE stands for, SSE stands for. Using S3, there was a customer managed key option, and then there was a middle option where you actually use a service inside of AWS. Does anyone know the name of that form of server-side encryption? Because there was S3, there was, right, customer managed keys. Yeah, so KMS. So SSE KMS uses the key management service, which is just a software-based key management system where AWS can use what's called a primary, sometimes referred to as a master key, to encrypt data keys for, say, like volumes, S3 buckets, etc. Right? So the key management system, key management service. Okay, so inside of that, the other feature that you could add inside of S3 was the ability to create automated copies of your buckets, like from one region to the next. Does anyone remember what that was called when you actually created automated connections between one bucket in one region versus a bucket in another region? It's definitely a replica, right? The full word, I think, Sean, is replication. So what is it called when you set up a region to region connection using replication? That's right, cross-region replication. Excellent. Now, in order for cross-region replication to work, AWS wants you to turn this on inside of your bucket, and this is going to allow you to keep copies of every change that is made to a file. What is the name of that feature you can turn on in S3 that allows you to retain copies? Good. It's called versioning, right? So when you turn on versioning, that allows it to do replication, because even if you're making changes to a file, it's going to make sure that all those versions are replicated. It's also going to use that to create its own versions, just so you know. Good. All right. Now, there was something that you could turn on for S3 that wasn't actually like FTP or BitTorrent for S3, which I was joking about the other day because they actually just retired the BitTorrent for S3. I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. But there's a thing you could do to actually speed up your uploads into S3. There was a thing that you could add to S3. So whenever you were uploading to S3, you could add this feature onto it in order to use CloudFront to intercept the call, and it would actually make things faster. What is the name of that feature you can add to S3 that basically enables CloudFront to capture the upload and make it faster to S3. Because it's not, you don't just turn on CloudFront for that, right? So it's called transfer acceleration. So transfer acceleration is a way that you can turn it on so that when you do transfers, it actually gets intercepted by CloudFront. CloudFront then takes over and speeds it over the AWS's backbone. So transfer acceleration is a way to speed up your connections. Okay, good. All right. If EFS is for Linux boxes and actually just runs NFS, what is the name of the other flavor of file storage that is for Windows? FSX, that's right, File System X. And they did that on purpose because they offer a Windows version, they offer a Lustre version, which is actually for Linux, and then they offer an ONTAP and an OpenZFS version as well, right? So FSX is just referring to File System X, right? But EFS is just AWS's version of NFS. Okay, now one of those, regardless of the flavor, is instantly available across every single availability zone in a region if you set it up that way. Which one of those two is always available across an entire like availability zone, all the availability zones in a region? Is it EFS or is it FSX? Yeah. So EFS is the one that with no, like maybe like a slightly additional setup, you can actually get it to run across an entire, all the availability zones in a region. Don't get me wrong, FSX has some of those capabilities, especially if you're using the Windows file server, but by default, you're going to choose a particular flavor that supports that. Not all flavors of FSX support all the availability zones like across an entire region. Okay, good. If I want to do a high database throughput workload that has a lot of random IO to it, which of the 4 disk drives am I going to use inside of block storage, inside of EBS? That's right, IO2. That is provisioned IOPS, right? Those are the ones I'm going to use. Now, if I'm going to boot my system off of a drive, which of the 2 drives do I have to use? Or you can refer to the family. Which drives do I have to use if I want to actually have like my C drive or my boot volume, right? Timothy, I feel like you just leveraged your previous answer. Which two types? So yeah, so the IO2 and the GP3, you can use GP2 obviously, family of storage. Those are the only ones, the SSD backed ones, that can be used as boot drives. You can't use the mechanical drives as boot drives. Okay. Someone comes to me and says, look, I want the coldest storage you can give me inside of EBS. What is the coldest storage? What is the coldest drive I can get inside of EBS? Super cold 1. That's right. That's not what that stands for, by the way. I just made that up. Super cold 1. That's the way I remember it. Or streaming throughput 1, which is the other drive, but that's not really built for cold storage. That's built for sequential, for streaming throughput. Good. All right, so that's the coldest in EBS. What's the coldest storage inside of S3? Let's be very specific. What is the coldest flavor of storage? Yeah. I just have to laugh, Andrew. For 6 months, I called it like, I think I called it deep freeze, actually. I called it glacier deep freeze. I could not remember deep archive to save my life. I was like calling it deep freeze or deep something. I think it was deep freeze. And you know, whenever I was with Amazon, they were like, it's called deep archive. And I was like, no, we're going to call it deep freeze, right? He's like, you can't just make up names for this. So deep archive. Yeah, and I know, but Andrew, as you probably have seen, Fargate. That's all I have to say. Really? Someone loved Farscape and someone loved Stargate, so they smashed those 2 together, right? And decided they were going to make it Fargate because it's serverless. Anyway, bottom line is that Glacier Deep Archive is the coldest storage, right? What is the flavor of like storage class, the storage class you're going to use if you have unknown access patterns, but yet you still want to be able to move things into colder and hotter storage. What's the S3 storage class you're going to use when you don't know your access pattern, yet you still want to benefit from storage classification? That's right. Intelligent tiering. Heather, I feel like you just came up with a new name for like a machine learning service, actually, of some type, like it deep fries your data somehow. I feel like that's where the deep fryer came up. But S3 intelligent tiering is going to be the one where you get to move things around. Okay, good. All right, so let's move off of storage. Let's move on into database services. What is Amazon's data warehousing repository service? What is the name of that? Oh God, good luck with that, Heather. Good, Redshift. Now, Redshift works off the concept of nodes. I could ask some questions about that, but we're going to skip that. All right. What is Amazon's usually like premier proprietary NoSQL database? Notice I said the words proprietary because they have other SQL databases, right? NoSQL, sorry, other NoSQL databases. So that would be DynamoDB, right? So DynamoDB is their NoSQL, their like proprietary NoSQL database. And I'm sorry if I stumbled over that. So people thought I said SQL. Now, RDS, excluding Aurora, has 5 different database engines it can support. Give me the 5 database engines. So Postgres is one of them. So we'll count that already. What are the other 4? MySQL, that's 2. Oracle, that's 3. What's the other proprietary one it supports? The enterprise one. So there's Microsoft, MS SQL, Christian. Now you're just messing with me. I know that you know they don't run DB2. I know you're messing with me now. It's MariaDB, right? Is the other one. That's just trolling at this point, Christian. DB2, seriously. All right, so MariaDB, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, and MS SQL. Okay, so those are the 5. Now, Aurora, by the way, uses the same EC2 t-shirt sizes that the other RDS engines use, but Aurora also has a special mode that's not EC2. What is that called? Good. I know, right? That's pretty simple. It's called serverless, right? Pretty straight up. All right. If I want to take an RDS database and I want to run it a backup copy across another availability zone, what does AWS call it when you actually take a primary and you create a secondary database and put them in synchronous relationship with each other? No, read replicas are asynchronous, Timothy. They're not synchronous, right? And that's not a primary secondary relationship. That's a clone, basically. So what's the checkbox that you put on in order to get it to go across 2 availability zones? Well, now there it is, multi-AZ. Good, good. And yes, I mean, it would make sense, right? That cross region makes total sense. Obviously, you can use read replicas for DR backup, but that's asynchronous. Multi-AZ is where you get a synchronous backup. And remember, that just increases high availability. It doesn't increase performance. Read replicas would increase performance, especially if there were 20% or more of reads against the database in question. Perfect. All right. What is the name of Amazon's MongoDB compatible database? This is bonus points, by the way. I'm just putting this in your brain. Nope, not MongoDB compatible. DynamoDB is not MongoDB compatible. This one you may not know, right? But I was just making sure this like sticks in your brain somewhere. It's called DocumentDB. DocumentDB is the name of the MongoDB compatible database. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Oh, so question here is, what's the name of the read-only cache that you can stick in front of DynamoDB? You can either give me the short name or the long name. DAX, yeah, DynamoDB Accelerator. Okay, good. All right, moving off of databases. Oh, wait, hold on. There's one more question. What is Amazon's name for their tool that you can use to basically copy an on-premise database onto Amazon? You can do a one-time or you can do continuous replication. Close, very close, and I'm very close. So the database migration service, the DMS, right? Database migration service. All right, bonus question then, since the database migration service was a little harder. What's the name of the tool you can use that allows you to convert from one database to another type of database, like an Oracle to a DynamoDB or a MySQL to an MS SQL? What's the name of that tool that AWS offers? It was in the database section. Christian, good. What does SCT stand for? So you're converting from one schema to the next, right? So that's the schema conversion tool. Good, good. I know you got it because you had it typed and then hit enter. Perfect. Okay, moving on past databases. So we're on to monitoring and scaling. What is the name of the network devices that allow incoming connections, particularly from the internet, but they can be private as well, and it distributes load across an entire set of systems? What's Amazon's name for that? ELBs. Yeah, there we go. Good. Now there's particular flavors of ELBs. There's 4, one of which is retiring, so we're not going to talk about it. Which one of the 4 flavors is built for third-party security devices? Good. Gateway load balancers are built for third-party security devices. So this is where you buy stuff from the marketplace and it's programmatically launched inside your account. You can do things like malware detection, deep packet inspection, all kinds of stuff. Okay. It can be an inline tap or it can be an out-of-band tap that you just send traffic to and get a response from. Okay. I can't remember what they called that. Is that a side proxy? Oh, I can't remember now. All right, what's the name of the load balancer that actually can do advanced pathing and routing? So like if you want to go to /mobile and go to a different group of servers versus /desktop, what's the name of that one? Good. Application load balancer. All right, last but not least, what's the name of the super fast, it's a very simple load balancer that can handle hundreds of thousands, if not a million connections a second? All right, here's a question from yesterday's little practice exam. When I want to point a DNS record at the apex of a domain, do I use an A record or a C name? Good. And do I alias that A record or do I have it directly pointing to an IP address? Good. Just want to make sure that sticks. That is, you are going to get asked that. I don't know why they like asking that question. Every time I've taken the exam, they have that on there, and that's been there, I want to say, for the last 6 years at least. So anyway, you've been warned. Okay. All right. Next, other questions. What's the name of the metrics repository inside of AWS? That's right. And it's really CloudWatch metrics, just so you know. But when we say CloudWatch, since that was the first service, we're typically referring to metrics. If I want to gather disk utilization and memory utilization from inside of an operating system, I need to do one of 2 things. What are those 2 things? Either or, right? So one is install the CloudWatch agent, right? So I could actually automatically gather that information. What's another way in which I could omit my memory utilization and disk utilization? That's right, Sean. That's perfect. Sean, that's perfect. Custom metrics. That's exactly right. In other words, you could have a little Python or a Perl script in there, or even just have it set up on a cron job where the AWS command line, you're just pushing metrics into the system. Now you have to provide dimensions like the instance ID, the time interval, what you're pushing, like that kind of thing. But you could do that all in the command line. It'd be just one long command line push, right? Set it to run every 5 minutes or every 1 minute if you're doing detailed monitoring. You could push that into a system. Good. What's the name of the logging service that you turn on, or actually it's turned on by default, actually, that you turn on in order to track all API calls against your account? What's the name of that service? Good. Good. CloudTrail. Yes. Right. CloudTrail tracks the trail of all API calls inside of your account. Perfect. What's the name of the thing that you want to turn on when you want to track at either a NIC, a subnet, or a VPC level? You want to see all the network flows into your network. Has a very peculiar name. VPC flow logs. That one's actually pretty intuitive since it just checked network flow, oddly enough. Okay. What is the name of the subservice inside of CloudWatch that you can use to actually put in application logs, system logs, or whatever? It's going to seem like a trick question. It's really not. So if I want to dump logs inside of CloudWatch, what's the name of the subservice that houses the logs? It is actually just CloudWatch logs. I know, weird, right? It's actually intuitively named. Okay. What's the name of the new version of CloudWatch events that's used to basically trigger, ingest third-party triggers and also emit to third-party triggering? So. In other words, it was called CloudWatch events. What's the new name for it? Yeah, Event Bridge. It is a bridge between events. Good. I think I made just a brief reminder that there are 11 subservices underneath. There's like Canary Insights, Container Insights. Just know that underneath CloudWatch, there's a lot. Okay, we're gonna move on. All right, automation. All right, what's the name of the very tightly integrated infrastructure as code service inside of AWS? It's used to define and provision AWS resources. Good. What's the name of the tool you can use to write in your favorite programming language that then will generate CloudFormation? What's the name of that kit that you can use? Good. Cloud Development Kit. What's the name of the third-party importable libraries like that? It's also a kit that you can import into code where you could also just do your own thing programmatically instead of converting into CloudFormation. Yeah, Masood, that's good. Yeah, software development kits. Just don't forget the software development kits are there. The cloud development kit makes it easier for you to convert your objects into CloudFormation, but just know that you also just can just use the SDK as you see fit. Okay. When it comes to automation, when you're writing CloudFormation templates, there's one section that's required. What is the name of that section? Good. Yeah, if you're not creating anything, why did you even write a CloudFormation template, right? So if there's no resource section, there's no reason to even have the file. Okay. Resources. Good. All right. Now, in addition to like transforms and parameters and mappings and conditionals, there was a section, right, that wasn't resources, obviously, where if you created, for example, a load balancer and wanted the user of your CloudFormation script to immediately see the load balancer DNS name, you could put it in this section. You could also emit, for example, IP addresses or anything else that you created. And it was a special section at the bottom of usually of your CloudFormation script. Yeah, outputs, right? Outputs is a way. So not mappings, not parameters, not conditionals, not transforms, not resources, not metadata, right? At the very bottom, it's outputs usually. Now, by the way, do you have to put it in that order? You actually don't. That's just convention. People do it that way. Okay, good. If I wanted to like manage a running system and I wanted to have a dashboard for viewing things and I wanted to have a patch baseline I could apply and I wanted to have a maintenance window and I wanted to get compliance and inventory reports, what service would I go to inside of AWS to gather that information? Systems manager, exactly right. That one, by the way, has 17 subservices underneath it. So that is one of the most complex meta services that I think I've seen actually inside of AWS outside of like machine learning, honestly. So just be aware. That's a whole, it's almost like a whole platform in and of itself. All right, that's used to manage running systems. I mentioned in passing that if you need a configuration management, that AWS actually does have servers for Chef and Puppet that you can run in the cloud. And there's a particular name for it, right? And so if you need a Chef or Puppet server, this is the service you're going to use. I just mentioned that in passing briefly. It's going to show up on the exam. All right, that's called OpsWorks. Older service, been around for a minute. Originally, it was a company they bought called Scalar, if I remember correctly. Scalarity. Don't make me. And then they added Chef and they added Puppet to it. I'm waiting for them to come out with Ansible, honestly. That would be cool, frankly. Ansible seems to be gaining a lot more popularity in the private sector nowadays. All my buddies are giving up on Chef and Puppet and moving to Ansible. So, all right. So remember, Systems Manager and CloudFormation are considered kind of the two primary tools that you're going to look at and design for. There's a bunch more questions we could ask, but we'll leave it there. All right, containers. Let's talk about containers. If you had to describe containerization in 2 words, what would you use to describe what containerization is? What someone says, hey, what is containerization? You got 2 words. What would you say? Well, first of all, Andrew, those are great characteristics. So yes to that, right? Deployable and repeatable, but not process virtualization. Yeah, application virtualization, process jailing, application packaging, process packaging. Those are all great words. I prefer process virtualization because I think it conveys the entire thing. But if you said process jailing or process standardization, those will all like fit to a certain degree, right? Now, what is the name of the file that you use to build containers? And please, proper spelling on this. Yeah, good, a Docker file, right? You have to use a Docker file and it has to be capital D unless you're going to specify the file. Other questions here is this a procedural file or is this a declarative file? Isn't it weird? Everyone talks about it being a declarative format, but it actually is like, start here, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then do this, right? Just so you know, that's procedural. If it was declarative, it would be like, land here. This is what I want, right? Instead, it doesn't tell you what it wants. The Docker file is like, nope, I want you to get 2 slices of bread, and I want you to put some lettuce here and get a black bean burger, and let's add some cheese, and then I want you to cook it, and then, you know, when you want this, I want you to eat it, right? That's it. Like, that's procedural, not declarative. Okay. All right. So once you've generated your image, and I'm just going to call it a Docker image, but I just want you to know that we're talking about container images. Docker is not the only flavor of containers. It's like Kleenex. Kleenex is not the only brand of tissues. It's just that Docker was there first, and so that's considered synonymous with containerization. All right. So you've created your container image, your Docker image. and you need a place to copy it up to on AWS. What is the name of the service that you can copy these images up to using Amazon's favorite word? You got to use Amazon's favorite word, Elastic Container Registry. Okay, so remember, it's the Elastic Container Registry. Now, do you have to use ECR? No, you can actually enable your cluster to actually get out to hub.docker.com. Just know that most enterprises don't allow that. Not if they're paying attention. All right, so then what's the name of Amazon's proprietary container service that's easier to use but doesn't have industry compatibility? Yeah, Christian, I saw you mention that earlier also. It's ECS, right? So Timothy and Christian. Yeah, so ECS is the Elastic Container Service, proprietary to AWS. They use the concept of tasks instead of pods, tasks and services, right? All right, so then what's the name of Amazon's non-proprietary CNCF certified container service? What is that one? Good. Both of them actually use what has their base unit of capacity. In other words, if you're not going serverless, what do they use instead? Pretty straightforward, right? What's the name of the plane, not the control plane, but the other plane that actually hosts the containers? What do they call that in both ECS and EKS? Good, it's the data plane. What is the name of the version of ECS and EKS that doesn't use servers that Michael keeps joking about is an amalgam of Farscape and Stargate? Right? Which is just another way of saying serverless. Excellent. Okay. Well, there's a bunch of other questions asked there, but I think we're going to stop. That's it. That's good enough, actually. Okay. So hopefully that got the broad scale juices rolling, gave you a good review for yesterday. Questions?
So just to clarify, so Fargate is a serverless data plane?
That's right. It's a serverless data plane. You never, when you start an ECS or an EKS cluster, you actually never see the primary, like what they formerly called the master nodes. You never see the master nodes.
Gotcha. So is the Fargate works with ECS and
Fargate.
EKS?
Yeah, it does. What you do is you create a cluster, and then you have to create what's called a Fargate profile. And what happens is if you launch a container that matches that profile, it goes into serverless mode. If you don't match a container that doesn't match the mode, then it'll try and launch on EC2, but only if you have EC2 instances associated with your cluster.
Gotcha. So Fargate can't be just used by itself. It has to be used with these two services, either of them.
Fargate does not exist outside of these two services. I don't know why they talk about it as a separate product.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's like Aurora. There's no console for Aurora. It's inside of RDS, right? There's no console for Fargate. It's inside ECS and EKS.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, I get it, right? The team that came up with Fargate is probably pretty proud of it because it is a separate team from the team that came up with ECS and EKS, but I don't know. They can make it easier on us a little bit. Wishful thinking. All right. Any other questions? Well, you might be saying to yourself, what are we doing today? Well, here's what we're doing. So today we are going to we're gonna be talking about networking too, which is just a little bit more about transit gateway and connecting things together. We're gonna have a little conversation about serverless in a lab, and then we're gonna have some edge services in a lab, and then we're gonna have a little bit of backup and recovery. So as far as the structure of the day, skill builder. I mentioned my dissatisfaction with skill builder. I'm sorry if I'm giving you the impression that I don't like it. I just don't like that it logs me out all the time. So to give you a little bit of the flavoring of today. Oh, that's sweet. Nice. sorry, I'm trying to show you the schedule for today. So the general course schedule for today basically has us doing the review, which is what we just did. And then basically networking for, for most of the morning. And then we're going to spend the afternoon kind of catching up on serverless backup and recovery. And then remember, right after lunch, I'm actually going to do the practice review stuff with you then, including making sure you have like a file that has a zip file that has everything in there. And then the end of the day is actually the capstone lab. Just know that just before we do that, as a reminder, I'm going to officially close class. I'm going to give you the evaluation, and then I'm going to hang with you for those who want to do the capstone lab. A lot of people end up being a little too tired to do it, and they're just like done. And at that point in time, you can go, no rancor, I totally support you. I will actually also share the playlist link with you today to make sure you have it. But that's it. Like, we're going to close class. It'll be about 2 hours early. So instead of, officially closing at 5, we're going to stop at 3 o'clock. I'm going to hang with anybody and everybody until 5 o'clock. But if you want to be done at 3, you can. And it might be 3, like plus or minus 30 minutes, just so you know, depending on our pacing. But that's what the day is going to look like, is that we're going to end around 3:30, and then we're going to close, and I'll hang out with you to do the labs. Okay. So normal at lunchtime, taking a lunch at noon. Normal break time, we'll be taking breaks around 10:30, right, or so, and then again at around 3 o'clock, 3:30. Okay. All righty then. All right, let's do networking too. Okay. First of all, don't answer that question. Don't answer the question about how many VPCs you have in your organization. I know you have a lot. You have a lot. I actually even asked a small company was it last week that I was teaching this? I even asked a small company the other week. I was like, hey, how many VPCs do you have in your organization? And they're like, we don't know. So don't worry about that. All right, here's the business driver that we're looking for, is that we're on to like version 2 of networking. You might say, Michael, why do we need to talk about networking again? Well, this time we're beyond like the fundamentals, right? So we're going to talk mainly about how do we get independent networks to communicate with each other? What if we need to connect hundreds of VPCs and VPNs and direct connects together? And then, how can we connect with a hybridized data center? Actually, hold on. Let me manage myself properly.